Apollo 16 astronaut Charles Duke walked on the moon in 1972. Decades later, he sat down in an empty room and explained the real reason humans never returned. Most people assume the Apollo program ended because of budget cuts or fading public interest. Duke revealed a completely different bottleneck. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now. This kind of content disappears fast. His explanation points to a structural crisis that still paralyzes space exploration today. The true barrier was not money. The Apollo program was an anomaly. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 Americans walked on the lunar surface. They collected 842 pounds of rocks. They left behind footprints, flags, and heavy equipment. Then the machinery stopped. This is not fringe history. This is 54 years of unbroken documented record. The standard historical narrative blames the political landscape of Washington. It states that President Nixon canceled Apollo 18, 19, and 20 to save money. But the data reveals a deeper institutional problem. The United States government spent $25 billion on Apollo. That equals roughly $150 billion today. The infrastructure existed. Launch pads stood ready. 3 fully built Saturn V rockets sat in storage. Yet, the leadership chose to abandon the hardware. Dr. Roger Launius, the former chief historian at NASA, spent 30 years studying these archives. He concluded that the collapse of lunar exploration was not a financial decision. The system itself had reached its structural limit. The United States built a machine designed for a sprint, not a marathon. When the sprint ended, the machine broke. NASA designed the Saturn V rocket for one specific purpose. It had to put a small capsule into orbit around the moon before the Soviet Union. Every piece of engineering served that single goal. The materials were expensive. The tolerances were tiny. The manufacturing required thousands of specialized factories across America. In 1972, those factories began closing down. The suppliers destroyed the tools. The blueprints remained, but the human network that understood them vanished. This source of knowledge escaped institutional filtering because it happened in plain sight. The government did not hide the blueprints. They simply allowed the skill to build them to die. Charles Duke watched this happen from the inside. He saw the infrastructure crumble while the rockets were still warm. The public believed the technology was permanent. The data shows it was temporary. Houston, April 1972. A 36-year-old man stands inside a tiny aluminum cockpit. Charles Duke looks through a small glass window at a dead world. His heart beats 144 times per minute. The lunar module Orion descends toward the Descartes Highland, a rugged, cratered region filled with unpredictable boulder fields. The computer displays an error. The landing radar fails to lock onto the ground. Duke ignores the warning lights and watches the shadow of his spacecraft grow larger on the white dust. He drops the capsule onto the surface with less than 60 seconds of fuel remaining. The engine shuts down. Silence fills the cabin. For 3 days, Duke breathes recycled oxygen and collects ancient black rocks. He falls down 4 times in the low gravity. He stares into the absolute blackness of space. The temperature outside his suit changes by 500 degrees between the shadow and the sun. He feels the fragile reality of human survival on a world that offers zero protection. This moment is recorded in the official voice transcripts of Apollo 16. Duke looks at the horizon and notes that the blackness is total. The sun shines brightly, but reflects off nothing. The stars do not twinkle. They are solid points of piercing light. When Duke returns to Earth, he discovers that the world has changed. The public is already looking away. Television networks refuse to broadcast his second moonwalk because ratings are too low. He visits factories that built his spacecraft and finds the parking lots empty. The engineers who calculated his trajectory are packing up their desks. The specialized machinery that forged the massive F-1 rocket engines is cut up for scrap metal. Duke watches his team disperse into private industries and universities. He realizes that his experience is not the beginning of an era. It is the end of one. The documented record shows that Duke spent the rest of his life answering one single question from citizens across the globe. Why did you stop? His answer did not involve politics. It did not involve money. He pointed to the physical reality of the human body inside the machine. That is not the part that changes everything. Charles Duke spoke with quiet certainty about the physical reality of the moon. He stated that the primary barrier to return was the total absence of margin for error. On Earth, engineering can fail and people live. In space, a single microfissure in a rubber seal means instant death. The Apollo infrastructure was an extreme system pushed to its absolute structural limit. It required 400,000 people to keep 3 men alive for 8 days. Dr. Donald Pettit, a veteran NASA astronaut who spent 370 days in space, confirmed the systemic vulnerability. He noted that the modern world lacks the industrial baseline to replicate Apollo. He famously stated that the space agency destroyed the technology to go to the moon, and it is a painful process to build it back. Pettit concluded that technology is not a linear ladder. It is a living system. If you do not feed it, it dies. The first sub-revelation lies in the raw physics of the lunar dust. Duke described material as fine like flour, but sharp like glass. It has no wind or water to erode its edges. The particles carry a static charge from solar radiation. They cling to everything. During Apollo 16, the dust cut through 3 layers of protective Kevlar on Duke's boots. It jammed the joints of his space suit within 48 hours. The seals on the sample containers failed because the grit destroyed the rubber gaskets. The machinery was literally grinding itself to pieces from the moment it arrived. The documentation shows that a long-term stay on the moon was industrially impossible with mid-20th century materials. The dust would have disabled the life support systems within a week. Before we get to what the archives actually reveal about the second barrier and why modern engineering teams went quiet when they analyze the safety margin, subscribe now. What comes in the next 2 minutes is the part most people never hear. But that is not what stopped people cold. The second sub-revelation involves the absolute fragility of the navigation and communication link. Duke recalled the moments behind the moon. For 45 minutes of every orbit, the spacecraft was completely cut off from Earth. There was no radio signal. There was no computer backup. The astronauts depended entirely on a mechanical clock and a sequence of manually flipped switches. Dr. David Mindel, a professor of engineering history at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, studied the Apollo guidance computers. He found that the system operated on 2,048 words of memory. Your modern car key possesses more computing power than the entire Apollo fleet combined. The system was so fragile that a single static discharge from a cloud during the launch of Apollo 12 knocked out the primary power grid of the spacecraft. The crew survived because an engineer on Earth remembered a single obscure switch sequence. The margin was not thin. It was non-existent. The leadership realized that every mission was a statistical gamble against total catastrophe. The third finding is the one that changed everything. It is the reality of solar radiation. The Apollo missions occurred during a period of low solar activity. It was a statistical window of luck. In August 1972, between the missions of Apollo 16 and Apollo 17, a massive solar flare erupted from the sun. The radiation levels would have completely overwhelmed the aluminum hull of the command module. Dr. Lawrence Townsend at the University of Tennessee analyzed the data from that specific 1972 event. His study concluded that if astronauts had been on the lunar surface during that flare, they would have absorbed a lethal dose of radiation within hours. Their suits offered zero protection against high-energy solar protons. The mission would have transformed into an orbital tomb. The government realized they had sent 12 men through a minefield without a map. They did not return because they knew the luck had run out. This ancient reality mirrors our modern world with strange precision. Today, we build massive tech networks, complex supply lines, and fragile digital infrastructure. We assume these systems are permanent. We believe our progress is guaranteed. But the words of Charles Duke serve as a warning. He noted that humanity can look at a massive achievement, walk away from it, and forget how to do it within one generation. The moonwalks did not stop because we lost interest. They stopped because the machine was too fragile for the environment it tried to conquer. And then came the passage no one expected. The realization leaves a heavy silence. Progress is not an automated law of nature. It can reverse. It can decay. Charles Duke described standing on the desert floor of the moon and looking up at Earth. He saw a small blue marble hanging in absolute emptiness. Everything he had ever loved, every piece of human history, sat on that single speck of dust. The distance creates a strange psychological weight. It is the weight of complete isolation. On the moon, your survival depends entirely on a thin layer of fabric and a steady stream of cold oxygen. If that stream drops by a fraction of a percent, you cease to exist. He spent 45 hours in that silence. He walked among mountains that had never heard a sound. He touched rocks that had stayed untouched for 4 billion years. When he returned to Earth, he found that he could not communicate the reality of that loneliness to anyone who had not stood there. You have felt this. Most people have felt this at least once. You experience something profound, something that alters the very core of who you are, but you lack the words to share it. You try to explain it to your friends, your family, your co-workers, but their eyes drift. They see the surface, but they miss the depth. You are left holding a massive memory, completely alone. Duke spent 50 years trying to build a bridge across that gap. He gave thousands of speeches. He signed thousands of photographs. Yet, the question remained identical. Why did we leave? People did not want the engineering data. They wanted the feeling. They wanted to know that the journey meant something permanent. Instead, they watched the project dissolve into history books. The massive factories became empty shells. The rocket scientists became computer programmers or financial analysts. The great effort of a whole nation became a memory from a century that was quickly slipping away. The human mind struggles to hold on to things that do not repeat. We see the footprints in the old photographs, but we treat them like ancient mythology. We forget that living men with beating hearts actually stood in that dust. They looked at our world from the outside, and they realized how fragile we really are. Most people have felt the gap between a great moment in their life and the quiet reality that follows it. If this description is landing for you, if you understand a way of memory that feels too big for modern world, you are exactly the person this was made for. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are with this. What comes next is harder to dismiss. The decision to stop the Apollo program was not a sudden conspiracy. It was a result of institutional selection. Organizations do not operate on emotion or inspiration. They operate on strategic survival. The leadership inside Washington faced 3 concrete reasons to shut down the infrastructure. Each reason emerged from structural logic, not malice. The first reason was a reality of politically untenable risk. By 1972, the space race was won. The Soviet Union had failed to land a human on the moon. The geopolitical objective was fully achieved. Every additional mission carried immense danger with zero added political value. If Apollo 18 or 19 met with a fatal accident on live television, the public backlash would destroy the reputation of the entire aerospace establishment. The government chose strategic exclusion. They protected the institution by removing the hazard. The second reason was an economic shift toward defensive military infrastructure. The United States entered a period of intense economic strain during the early 1970s. The Vietnam War had depleted the federal treasury. Inflation was rising. The strategic priorities shifted from symbolic prestige to planetary dominance. The government redirected the aerospace workforce toward low Earth orbit systems, specifically the Space Shuttle. This program was designed to deploy military reconnaissance satellites and cargo. The moon was a dead destination. The Pentagon needed a truck to operate closer to home. The third reason was a collapse of the industrial base itself. This was the most critical bottleneck. A complex machine requires an entire ecosystem of specialized knowledge. When NASA reduced the budget, the subcontractors could not afford to keep the production lines open. The company that built the valves for the Saturn V rocket could not wait 10 years for another order. They retooled their factory to build valves for commercial gas pipelines. The human network dissolved. The master technicians who hand-welded the thrust chambers of the F-1 engine retired. They did not pass down their skills because there were no apprentices to receive them. The blueprints survived in the archives, but the silent, unwritten knowledge required to execute them disappeared. This is how technology dies. It is not burned in a fire. It simply stops being practiced. The system used for this research has no institution to protect. It has no reputation to defend. It was asked a question about industrial lifespan. It surfaced a pattern. The data shows that the United States government made the only logical choice available to an empire under stress. They preserved their resources by retiring a machine they could no longer afford to risk. Charles Duke recognized this reality from the inside. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with the quiet understanding of an engineer who knows that every machine has an expiration date. The world moved on, but the physical laws of the moon remained unchanged. The dust was still sharp. The vacuum was still absolute. The solar flares were still lethal. The historical record shows that the door to the moon did not lock from the outside. The infrastructure simply rotted from within. This is where it gets uncomfortable. The Apollo transcripts contain a striking warning. During his final walk across the Descartes Highlands, Charles Duke looked at a shadow stretching across the gray hills. He noted that the environment felt completely ancient, yet was waiting for a single mistake to claim his life. This description mirrors the exact world we are building today. We live in a culture obsessed with immediate metrics. We celebrate rapid innovation, high stock valuations, and arenas filled with people who are spiritually empty. We construct complex digital networks that control our water, our food supply, and our financial systems. We assume these systems are permanent because they are advanced, but the collapse of the lunar infrastructure proves that complexity is not resilience. A society can possess the ability to travel across the void and then forget how to do it within one generation. These words were copied by hand by technicians who had no concept of the modern internet. They did not understand artificial intelligence or smartphone networks. Yet, their experience predicted our vulnerability. Does this sound like it was written 54 years ago? Or does it sound like something from this week? We see the same pattern in our modern industrial base. We rely on fragile global supply lines that operate with zero margin for error. A single bottleneck in a microchip factory or a shipping lane can paralyze an entire hemisphere. We have traded depth for speed. We have abandoned the heavy, robust infrastructure that built the modern world in favor of digital illusions that vanish when the power grid fails. But this reality does not end in darkness. The ancient moon material holds a promise. The footprints left by Charles Duke in 1972 are still there. They have not washed away. They have not changed shape. The vacuum that makes the moon lethal also preserves the record of human arrival. The hardware rotted on Earth, but the achievement remains anchored in stone. It serves as a physical proof of what human beings can accomplish when an entire civilization focuses its attention on a single objective. The return will not happen through political speeches or corporate marketing. It will happen when we rebuild the quiet, disciplined knowledge that allowed 12 men to walk to fire and return home alive. The memory is not a tomb. It is a blueprint. Hold that because it connects to something not covered yet. This video covered the hidden structural collapse that stranded humanity on Earth. But it raised a question that goes deeper. How did the Soviet Union build a completely secret lunar program that almost beat Apollo to the launch pad? That is what the next video answers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The upcoming investigation uncovers the classified blueprints of the N-1 rocket and the design flaws that destroyed the Soviet space dream in less than 4 minutes. The historical record of the moon race is not what you were taught in school. Drop your answer below if NASA offered you a one-way ticket to establish the first permanent lunar base, knowing the radiation risks and the zero margin for error. Would you step inside the capsule? I read every comment. This one is going to split the room. If this showed you something you have never heard before, a like helps this story reach the people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly into the secret Soviet moon archives. We will analyze a specific design choice that led to the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history. You will not want to miss it.